Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Qi Zhi. Coming up in this edition, a ceasefire brokered by the United States and France is in effect between Israel and Hezbollah. France is protesting the Mercosur deal with South American countries, saying it will create unfair competition. And Thanksgiving travel in the United States is busier with a few hurdles this year. We begin with the Middle East. Israel and Hezbollah are observing a 60-day ceasefire after Israel's Security Cabinet approved the deal. Under the agreement, Israeli troops will retreat to their side of the border, and Hezbollah is required to end its armed presence in southern Lebanon. Thousands of Lebanese troops and UN peacekeepers will deploy to the region south of the Litani River. Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati has welcomed the deal. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had demanded the right to act should Hezbollah violate its obligations, but Lebanese officials have rejected writing that into the proposal. Shortly before the ceasefire deal took effect, the Israel Defense Forces released footage claiming troops have reached the Litani River for the first time since 2000. Jonathan Regev tells us about the strategic importance of this river during the current truce.
A key part of Lebanon, meaning the Litani River. This is the place where Israel demands that all Hezbollah forces will be driven to the north of that, north of the Litani River. In some places along the border, the river is 10 miles north of the Israeli border. But in this specific point that the soldiers and the head of the Northern Command reached, we're speaking of some 3-4 miles north of the border. Why is this important? Simply because this war is not only fought on the battleground, it's also a war of narrative, a war of psychology. And as this war is coming, maybe not to an end, but to ceasefire, a pause, both sides want to portray an image of success. And for Israel, an image of success is to show the army on the Litani River. This is where the Israeli army, say the generals, want to make sure that Hezbollah is no longer present. We want to push Hezbollah north of this border. And here we are, the Israeli army, at this point. This is the narrative that Israel wants to portray, along with the killing of all of the Hezbollah leadership. That successful Beeper operation some 2 months ago. This is the image, this is the picture, the narrative that Israel wants to portray. On the other hand, there's also the narrative that Hezbollah wants to portray to show their narrative. Even after 2 months of an extended Israeli war, we are still here, and we, Hezbollah, can still fire deep into Israel.
That was Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv. Still on the region, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza as the world body convenes a special meeting marking the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. The UN has also described the worsening humanitarian crisis as appalling and inexcusable. Chinese President Xi Jinping has sent a message to the meeting, stressing that the pressing task of the Palestinian question is to implement the UN Security Council resolutions concerning ending the war and easing regional tension. Jody Jacobs has more from New York.
It's been 13 months since the latest conflict began in Gaza, and the fighting has left thousands killed and millions displaced. At a special session on Tuesday to commemorate the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, speakers called for an end to the fighting, urging the Security Council to take swift action.
The time for action is now. Justice for the Palestinian people can no longer wait. The world is watching, and history will judge us not by our words, but by our actions. Let us act with urgency, courage, and determination.
But the UN Security Council remains deadlocked, despite being entrusted with upholding international peace and security. Last week, the Council failed to pass a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire and the release of all hostages after the United States vetoed it. And while diplomats are at a stalemate, the United Nations has reiterated its call for a ceasefire, warning that more people will die if humanitarian aid does not reach Gaza soon.
This year's commemoration is especially painful, as those fundamental goals are as distant as they have ever been. Nothing justifies the 7th of October terror attacks by Hamas and the taking of hostages. and nothing justifies the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. Yet more than a year later, Gaza is in ruins. More than 44,000 Palestinians, mostly women and children, have been reportedly killed, and the humanitarian crisis is getting worse by the day. This is appalling, and it is inexcusable.
Meanwhile, UN humanitarians addressed the UN Security Council on Tuesday, pleading for the protection of humanitarian workers. The Council convened a special session on how best to prevent and respond to attacks against humanitarian and UN personnel, supported by 115 countries.
Gaza has become the most dangerous place on earth ever for aid workers, with over 330 humanitarian staff killed since October 7 last year. To those who ask me who can be done to protect humanitarian workers and what can be done, my first answer is we urgently need a ceasefire in Gaza, and we need parties in this conflict to genuinely protect civilians and respect international humanitarian law.
Israel has denied impeding the delivery of aid into Gaza. It maintains that aid trucks are often hijacked and looted by Hamas militants.
That was Jody Jacobs in New York. In Europe, French farmers have been protesting outside the European Parliament against a trade agreement with South American countries. The Mercosur deal in 2019 aims to create one of the world's biggest free trade zones, but is yet to be adopted. Some European farmers say it will create unfair competition. Ross Cullen brings us reactions.
French farmers certainly not keen on this trade deal. They fear that there will be a flooding of the European market, of the French market, with cheap exports coming from South American countries, members of the Mercosur bloc, Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay and Bolivia. And they are worried that there would be, for example, beef and poultry being exported, perhaps subject to fewer regulations than their current product in the French market. And so they have been blocking certain roads. They have been outside town halls, city halls in Strasbourg as well. So they are showing their anger and their frustration with this situation at the EU level, but also here at the French level. However, their protests have not fallen on deaf ears, because there is a lot of agreement from public and politicians about the fact that France is in disagreement with the accord between the EU and Mercosur. The French Prime Minister, Michel Barnier, has said that France is firmly opposed to this agreement. He says he hears and understands the anger. He hears and understands the tensions on the streets and in the fields of France. It is one of those rare times when we have agreement. The Prime Minister, the President, the government, the opposition, they are all in favour of voting down this agreement. They are all going to vote against the Mercosur deal, but that is only at Parisian level, at French level, at national level. Their vote will not have an impact on Ursula von der Leyen, Germany and Spain, and their drive to get this deal over the line. They fear it would have the negative impacts would be outweighed by the positive impacts for companies like LVMH, L'Oreal, big French giants who will have another luxury market for their goods. The car industry as well. Good news for French brands like Renault, Peugeot, German brands, Volkswagen and Audi as well. So they are arguing at EU level that there's a lot of positive impacts to outweigh it. However, here in France, they have been saying this is the straw that broke the camel's back. There's so much pressure on French farmers already going through the environmental transition, impacts from exports from other areas of the world, tariffs potentially coming in. They are already being subsidised to a huge amount by the EU. They're saying that they are really struggling. And so there is a lot of anger, but we are seeing a lot of agreement. French MPs on their side, and they are very likely to be voting down this deal. However, it's very likely still to pass at EU level.
That was Ross Cullen reporting from Paris. Turning to North America, the United States is entering the busiest travel season during this Thanksgiving week. 80 million people are expected to be on the move until next Monday. They may have to brace for some big headaches. Tony Waterman reports from the airport in Austin, Texas.
It's an unconventional Thanksgiving for Caroline Cosgrove and Rob Fulmer. The couple traveling from Oregon by plane, then a rental car here in Austin before a bus ride later to Houston.
It's been fine. I mean, the flight was fine. It was uneventful. We didn't have any trouble getting a rental car.
There was like an atmospheric river passing through, but here weather is not a concern. Traffic, we're taking the bus, so it's the bus driver's problem.
They are just 2 of the 80 million people expected to travel 80 kilometers or more this Thanksgiving holiday. The vast majority will pile into cars. Lower gas prices a relief for cash-strapped travelers. Despite higher ticket prices, a record number of people are expected to fly domestically, nearly 6 million. International bookings have also skyrocketed, up 23% compared to last Thanksgiving. While operations are running smoothly in Austin, the Federal Aviation Administration has warned of possible delays in the Northeast, particularly in New York and New Jersey, due to a shortage of air traffic controllers.
If we are short on staff, we will slow traffic as needed to keep the system safe.
Inclement weather could also cause headaches on the roads and in the skies. A major storm rolling across the U.S. expected to bring wet and snowy weather in areas from coast to coast.
Even though we're having beautiful weather here in Austin, we always tell passengers to check with their airlines because there could be weather where you're arriving or where you're connecting.
And for passengers who do get stranded, new regulations could provide some relief. Airlines are now required to automatically issue refunds to domestic travelers who are delayed more than 3 hours, or international travelers delayed more than 6 hours, without those people having to jump through hoops for their money. The big exception, though, weather and air traffic can't be the culprit.
That was Tony Waterman on Thanksgiving travels across the United States. In Africa, the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda have signed an agreement to advance the peace process in eastern DRC, where the armed forces and the M23 rebel group are engaged in conflicts. The DRC and Rwanda are maintaining dialogue through Angola's mediation. Chris Okumringa has more in Kinshasa.
For many of the people who have been displaced by this conflict in North Kivu and South Kivu province, all they want is a return to peace. And they do not care how it will happen. They just want to go back to their homes and continue their ordinary lives. But there's another group of Congolese, very many of them, who are very disappointed about this agreement between the government and Rwanda. And that's because many of these people have held this view that Rwanda has long held plans to kind of conquer the DRC, the east of the DRC, North Kivu and South Kivu, and cut off those areas. So they have been against any kind of talks between their government and the Rwandan government right from the outset. So ultimately, this deal is supposed to lead to an end of the fighting between the M23 rebels and the government forces, the FARDC. That will enable the civilians who have been displaced. We're told there are about 7.3 million people displaced in the east of the DRC. They'll be able to go back to their homes and continue their usual lives, taking their children to school. But there's something about this deal. You see, the DRC government, under this mediation by Angola, is supposed to fight a group known as the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda. And in return, the Rwandan government army is supposed to withdraw from eastern DRC. We are waiting to see whether these two, both sides, will really adhere to this deal that has been signed. So we are still waiting. It's still early to determine whether this will have a real impact in getting lasting peace in eastern DRC.
That was Chris Okumringa on the prospects of a new peace deal between the DRC and Rwanda. Finally, here in China, the China International Supply Chain Expo in Beijing is highlighting 6 industrial chains, including that in the smart vehicle sector. Biran tells us more.
In the smart vehicle chain at the Expo, Bosch, XPeng, Rio Tinto, and China Baowu Steel Corporation has set up a joint booth together to showcase upstream and downstream collaborations across the automotive manufacturing industry, spanning raw materials, component supply, and the entire car making. And Chinese local companies and foreign companies have worked closely with each other to form a very resilient and mutually beneficial car industrial chain. Within this industrial chain, Bosch supplies parts to XPeng, while Baowu and Rio Tinto together act as material suppliers, highlighting their collaborative efforts in different stages of the industry chain. This collaboration has led to the creation of a complete and a very effective automotive industry. This kind of ecosystem of collaboration and partnership has become a very strong barrier against the uncertainties from the external environment and the complex geopolitical tensions currently. As China boasts the world's largest and most comprehensive automotive manufacturing industry chains currently, this kind of ecosystem are able to achieve a very highly integrated component supplying and localized suppliers clustering, with shared design, joint research and development, and of course, synchronized production.
That was Biran reporting. Now recapping the headlines, a ceasefire deal is now in effect between Israel and Hezbollah. The French farmers and government are united in opposing the Mercosur trade deal with the South American countries. And Thanksgiving travelers in the United States are bracing for higher ticket prices and bad weather. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a one-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Qizhi. Thank you for listening.